Hello, friends. Welcome to Stand to Reason. Glad to be with you today, and I look forward to talking with you later on in the show about anything on your mind, of course, that deals with ethics, values, and religion. While I have as a goal to defend classical Christianity and classical Christian values. Usually if we have a conversation with an author, it's towards the end of the show. This time we're having it at the beginning of the show, partly because of a time warp. He's on the other side of the world, more or less. He's across the pond in the UK, so therefore we're having him on first hour today. Graham Veale is the author of New Atheism, a Survival Guide. He is head of a religious education department at the city of Armagh High School and co-founder of saintsandskeptics.org and Apologetics web ministry. Graham, good to have you on board today.
Very glad to be here. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Did I pronounce the city of Armagh there correctly?
You got the city of Armagh correct, yes. We don't pronounce our G's sometimes.
Okay, I was pretty close then.
That's you got it close, city of Armagh.
Hey, you know what? I'm glad that there's another Brit that is writing regarding the New Atheism, and I'll tell you, it's a strange reason. I don't know if you've ever heard this before, Graham, but Brits have a big leg up in America because they have this wonderful accent, and all they have to do is start talking, and they're already persuasive.
Well, you see, I'm an Irish Brit as well. I get the whole Irish connection as well, living in Northern Ireland. So I get a double whammy.
You get the double whammy. That's right. That's great. Well, we need that extra push because a couple of the new atheists have British accents. So we've just got to make sure that we can match them stride for stride here.
That's it.
Now, how is it? Now, yes, I am glad your book's on board. I recently read someone you might know, I think, who publishes under the same the publisher, David Robertson.
That's right. Yes. I don't know him personally, but certainly he recommends my book, and I'm certainly very happy to recommend his.
Right. Well, he's a Scotsman up in Dundee, and I met him in Poland a couple of months ago, and
very good.
Loved both of your books, though they're a little bit different. His a direct answer to Richard Dawkins' God Delusion. Yours more of a broader treatment of the issues that the new atheists challenge Christians on. By the way, why did you? I'm curious why you called it a survival guide.
I think it was. Initially I had called this book "McAtheism" because I think really what's happened to many online atheists is that they followed the example of the McChurch. In the 1990s, Chuck Colson and some others complained that evangelical churches were going down the road of mass marketing. The message, and they were losing some of the depth. And I felt that's what a lot of modern atheism is, McAtheism.
Right.
But my publishers pointed out that the only person who really understood that title was me. So they went for New Atheism, a Survival Guide. I think really because it would be a book that could help students in particular.
Right.
Whenever you get somebody like Richard Dawkins, as you mentioned, his very authoritative accent and his very scholarly credentials, whenever he issues a soundbite, it can sound very authoritative and very daunting.
Right.
But whenever you begin to look at the logic behind the soundbite, you find that there's nothing to it at all. It's empty. So it's really a survival guide to try to help students and those who work with students and young people to deal and to think through some of these issues.
Well, I was going to ask you, how is it that a high school teacher writes a book on the new atheist, but you gave me a hint there just a moment ago when saying students need a leg up in knowing how to deal with these challenges that sometimes sound compelling and sophisticated. Is that the right answer?
Yes, that would be yes. Particularly, I think one thing I mentioned at the start of my book is that we live in a generation where people think that we can find all the answers with a quick Google. So you go into Google and you type in what is the meaning of life, and you'll get your answers straight away. And it's not that simple. Wikipedia doesn't have everything sorted out for us, and we have to do a little bit of thinking. So it does tie into my teaching, where I really do have to push quite a few students to move away from this idea that you can just do a quick Google and you'll have the answer to you for whatever essay you've been sent.
Right. But on the other hand, though, as I'm looking at, say, the table of contents in your book, and it starts when atheism went viral. We'll talk a little bit about that. But just skimming over the topics: how to slay a spaghetti monster, science falls into a gap, design Dawkins and the problem with having a big brain. Hey, where's the evidence? Which you hear from the atheists a lot. Whales, tall tales, and miracles. The insider test for faith, and the gospel for good men and scoundrels. The last couple are a more direct statement of the gospel in defense of Christianity, but many of the basic kinds of challenges that are raised by the new atheists strike me as being a bit shallow, and though they might sound challenging at first, you go into some of these what sound like challenging rejoinders from the other side, and I think you very effectively show how shallow they are.
I think, yes. I mean, they quite often give, I mean, hey, where's the evidence? Is a wonderful slogan to throw at a Christian. I mean, I can talk about that for hours. And flying spaghetti monsters, I mean, that's a good conversation starter. It's provocative, and it sounds like, you're making fun of a Christian. But the second that somebody gives you an opportunity to come back and to explain why your belief is much more rational than that, I mean, there's good conversation starters here.
Sure.
I don't think we need to feel terribly threatened by a lot of these slogans. They do provide good opportunities.
Yeah, I like that last statement. We don't need to be terribly threatened. Of course, if we don't have any idea of how to respond to some of these challenges, it's going to be unsettling. And this is why a book like yours, which is less than 200 pages, it's let's just look here. Actually, it's 125, so it's very handy.
Yes.
It's very handy. It's very accessible. Let's talk about some of the content, Graham. How you talk about the new atheists going viral. How did they get so popular so quickly? It just seems like they just came out of nowhere and they were everywhere.
Well, the online communities, the infidels.net, I think it was. I mean, the online atheistic communities were already present prior to September the 11th. But then when September the 11th happened, it seemed to create a market for books that would attack religion. So, I mean, you have religious terrorists. What's a simple stop knee-jerk reaction? Well, let's get rid of religion.
Right.
So you get the God Delusion, and you get Sam Harris's books, and the two seem to fuse. The books seem to give people in these online communities a sense of identity. Now, I think it's very important for the church to realize just how strong that sense of identity is with many young atheists. Certainly, if you go back to previous debates about, for example, should humanism get a say in the religious education curriculum in Britain, a lot of people would very quickly come back and say, well, there's not very many humanists. They lack this sense of identity. They lack ways to get together. The internet changed that. And these groups, they're well educated. They're technologically literate. They're very vibrant. They're very energetic. And it's really, I think, these online communities that drive new atheism. It's not so much the celebrity authors. It's the websites. It's the blogs. It's the forums. And we should not underestimate the community that's there simply because it's online. It's very important to a lot of these people.
Do you think they're having an impact out of proportion with their numbers? Because I think the number of atheists has stayed fairly steady for the last 10 years, around 2% of the world's population, or maybe that's the States. I don't know, but it's relatively small.
I think people who identify as out-and-out atheists is actually fairly low. It does seem to stay around 2%. What new atheists will try to do, and what humanists try to do, is to try to claim anybody who says that they are non-religious.
The nuns.
Now, I think a problem with that is that Os Guinness points out that we live in a post-Christian, post-secular society.
Right.
It's post-Christian in Europe, but it's also post-secular, in that people have not moved from Christianity to atheism. They have moved from Christianity to a smorgasbord of any particular religious idea that you like. You might attend church once a year, and a Christian church, but believe in reincarnation.
Yeah, right.
Or believe that you in reading the tarot cards, or we haven't really moved away from a sort of I suppose a superstition in a way. But I don't think new atheists can simply go out and claim this great non-religious mass as theirs or their own.
This is the group I just referred to as the nuns, and I mean Nones, not the Nuns.
Yes, that's right. The nuns. The nuns are quite often a mixed-up group.
Right.
It's interesting that evangelicals and new atheists, though, I mean, this is part of the group that we want to target and capture. The nuns and also the Christians in name only. The people who attend church out of a sense of duty or cultural identity but don't have a living faith. These are the two groups that new atheists want to target, the nuns and the Christians in name only. And evangelicals are after, to a large extent, the same group, which is why I think there's an opportunity here. When new atheists address this group and say you've got to take religion seriously, they're creating a conversation about Christianity and about religion that we can take advantage of as well.
I wonder sometimes if there isn't a way in which we are allies in a certain fashion. If the nuns, as you pointed out, are confused, and anybody who identifies himself as a Christian and believes in reincarnation, for example, is deeply confused. And I'm not saying that just to look down at them and say they're wrong. Reincarnation doesn't do any work in Christianity.
Yes, that's right. It's from a completely different view of history and God and or lack of God. I mean, you just can't have the two worldviews together.
Well, it's like trying to put a carburetor on a computer.
Yes, exactly.
There's no place for it. But they don't realize this. Now, my suspicion is that a new atheist type, given the way they approach these kinds of questions, would also be the kind that would be quick to see that was a foolish combination.
That's right. The new atheists, interestingly, take a very Protestant evangelical view of faith. Well, not of faith, but certainly of being religious. If you're not wholeheartedly, totally committed to this, you're not taking it seriously enough. Plus certainly an online conference. One point that I can get agreement on with practically any new atheist, no matter how harsh they are or how insulting, is that if they believed in God, if they believed that Jesus was the Son of God, they would commit their lives totally. They cannot see the sense in just a token commitment to Christianity.
Yeah, well, good for them on that. At least they're that is something we would say, like, amen to them.
Yeah, so what? They all seem to be agreed on this, and that religion is about. They would say religion is about choice. You could have to choose to be religious. Now, the reason I don't say faith is that new atheists tend to have defined faith as belief in the absence of evidence or belief despite the evidence.
Well, that's the way they do. That's the way they define it.
Well, I think, yes, in a lot of cases, yes. But a belief without evidence, belief ignoring the evidence, and that's how they define faith. So I'm reluctant to say that they share our view of faith, because whenever you ask them what is faith, they tend to think it's blind belief. And it's very difficult to get this. I mean, one guy, Peter Boghossian.
Right, I know about him too.
Yes, I mean, it's
knowing what you think you don't know, or thinking you know what you don't know. I guess
Christian theology simply ignored the Bible. Simply ignored. He just creates his own little meme.
Yeah,
and this is a secularist meme, but it's very commonly held amongst the secular elites. This is the interesting thing. The new atheists give us an opportunity to challenge this idea. And to say, one of the reasons that this new atheist critique of religion sounds so false is because they're not really understanding what faith is. They don't understand what the Bible means by faith. And it does give us an opportunity to challenge that.
Well, part of the difficulty, it seems to me, Graham, is that there's a whole lot of Christians who don't understand the biblical definition of faith either.
That, unfortunately, is true. I think that our churches, this goes back to the idea of the McChurch, where you sell instead of teaching, instead of explaining the faith, we sell emotionalism.
Mm-hmm.
And emotionalism does seem to be the foundation of an awful lot of what happens in the evangelical church.
Mm-hmm.
And for that reason, Christians really aren't ready to give an answer, because all they have on a Sunday is really their shot of warm fuzzies that they get from their service. I mean, if you just want to generate raw emotion, that is very easily accomplished. Mm-hmm. And I do worry that the evangelical church has created part of the problem here because we weren't ready to give an answer.
Yeah. Well,
at a time when there are evangelical academics, more evangelical academics than we've had for maybe 50, 60 years.
Yes.
The church just was more interested in really putting people into seats than even reaching people.
Yeah, unfortunately. Well, in the UK, I'm curious about this. Let me back up. In the States, there has actually been a renaissance in Christian apologetics. And though there's massive numbers of people that are still out of the loop, there is a very, very robust movement in the States on and conferences and seminars and writers and speaking and MA programs in apologetics that are springing up everywhere, it seems, and it's really a wonderful thing. Would you say that the UK is beginning to experience something like that, lagging behind, kind of catching the tails of that, or where are you guys in the UK with that?
It's a little bit difficult for me to tell because I'm in Northern Ireland, which is, I suppose it's a little, but we don't really know whether we're Irish or British or what we are
isolated,
here, you know. But I'm slightly separated from the rest of the UK. In Northern Ireland, no. I mean, it's very, very difficult to get people to talk about apologetics.
But your book must have given you more visibility around in broader circles, right?
Not in Northern Ireland. No. I mean, the response. No, I mean, there's one church, Glen Abbey. Churches which are beside universities would be more willing to engage. Certainly, student groups would be willing to engage. But by and large, no, I don't really think that we've sensed the need here. In England, it's different. In England and Wales, it's become so secular that apologetics, I think, has become in many ways a very useful tool for evangelism, because people are immediately beginning their conversations with Christians. Well, why should I take any of this seriously? And apologetics is also, if you're starting with a defense of the faith, it's actually a much less threatening way. Quite often, we're just discussing ideas, and you can very gradually introduce the gospel to somebody who would maybe in other situations not darken the church's door. So I think that there are, in England, I would say yes. I mean, Justin Brearley, who would run the Unbelievable show, I think.
Right. I was on a show last year when I was in the UK.
He has a tremendous response within Britain, and you know, Premier Christian Magazine, which is doing very well.
Sure. It's almost like you're saying that the more godless things get, the more dramatic the contrast, and the easier it is at least to engage. If you have a very religious environment, which is much more the case, as I understand it, in Ireland, it's hard to see the definition between the so-called believer and the so-called non-believer. But in a more secularized environment like you have in England, the lines are more clearly drawn. Is that what you're saying?
The lines are more clearly drawn. I think within Northern Ireland there is I think our heads are in the sand, to be perfectly honest. The Belfast Telegraph, which would be our main newspaper here, is very anti-evangelical, I would describe it as. Nobody really is taking this on board. If you listen to our religious shows run by the BBC, again, there's what I would detect, or what I believe is an anti-evangelical slant, and certainly a very hostile to conservative Christianity. There is a secular elite in inverted commas, and they don't like this old-fashioned Christianity, and so we are very, very slowly, well, not slow, but it's happening much more quickly than people would like to admit. We're going to face the problems that Christians face in England very quickly. And to be honest, in Northern Ireland, I don't think we're ready for it. It's a source of frustration to me.
Well, but if the observation we were just making a few moments ago, there could be is true, then there could be a silver lining, because if Ireland gets more secular, then the lines get more clearly drawn, and then this becomes a motivation for Christians to distinguish themselves in apologetics over and against the secularized view, which turns out to be very, very empty, it seems. And there are ways that we can capitalize on that. And that strikes me.
Yes, I think so. Sometimes, yes, I think sometimes a little bit of hostility can be a very good thing for the church, and there is that silver lining there.
Well,
and to some extent, like I said, as atheists begin to come out, and I mean, a fantastic way to get people into what I would consider to be an evangelistic event are debates. William Lane Craig
debates, right?
This, but people who would not want to come and hear Christianity discussed, would not want to come and hear the gospel effectively, are prepared to come into a debate, because there's two sides there.
Yeah, two guys arguing with each other. Right.
But the message gets out. So, yes, I mean, there is a tremendous opportunity here as well.
Great. Talking with Graham Veale, his book is New Atheism, A Survival Guide. And when we come back after break, we're going to talk more about the content, about slaying spaghetti monsters and the challenge that New Atheists present to Christians with regards to the science issue, all that coming up here on Stand to Reason. Stay with us.
At Stand to Reason, we depend on the support of donors to carry on our mission to equip Christian ambassadors, and your non-cash donation items can help. You can transform your old cars, cell phones, or other items into ministry impact by donating them to Stand to Reason. Think of it. Because of your donation, Christians, just like you, will be able to effectively share their faith and change the lives of others forever. To make non-cash donations of all kinds to Stand to Reason, call iDonate at 877-897-4273 or go to idonate.com and visit STR's page. They'll take care of everything for you and Stand to Reason. Just call them at 877-897-4273 or visit idonate.com. Thank you very much for making Stand to Reason's work possible.
Stand to Reason. Greg Koukl here, giving you a piece of my mind as I do every week for 3 hours. And if you want the full 3 hours, podcast is easy. iTunes. I heard somebody say that they took all the social media in their organization, they combined it into one thing to make it easier. It's called UTwitFace. That chuckling in the background is Graham Veale, my guest here. What you can do is you can get this podcast at iTunes or str.org. That was what I was after. Sorry about that, Graham.
Not a problem at all.
That is a funny UTwitFace. Graham is author of New Atheism, A Survival Guide, which is what we're talking about here, and similar problems in facing the new atheists even across the pond. And I guess it was a faux pas to call you a Brit. I should have just said UK, huh? Because you're an Irishman.
That is a very contentious issue.
All right.
You can call me whatever you like. I answer to anything.
What is there a term that captures what a citizen of the United Kingdom would be called?
To be honest, when it comes to Northern Ireland, no. No matter what you call somebody in Northern Ireland, they will take offense. It's a very odd part of the world.
I am talking to the dear, gracious, ironic Irishman, Graham Veale, about the issues of the new atheists. Now, let's get into some detail here in your book. You start out talking about slaying a spaghetti monster, but before we get to specifically what that is and your response to that, you lead into it with an excellent little phrase I've never heard before. I love it. It's called sneer pressure. Tell us what that is and how it plays out in this discussion.
Well, sneer pressure really is somebody simply using their academic credentials to bully somebody else into silence, or to bully somebody else into conforming. And I think this happens a lot in New Atheist literature. You certainly see it an awful lot in, for example, the campaign to get Francis Collins, when he was appointed to the NIH in America. There was a campaign there along the lines of, sensible scientists can't believe this sort of thing. Now, I mean, if anybody's a sensible scientist, it's Francis Collins. But it's an attempt to try and bully, to sneer, to make somebody feel foolish and out of keeping with an academic culture, simply because they hold on to their religious beliefs. And this seems to be a fairly prominent playing card that's used quite a bit by New Atheists.
Right. Well,
to try and make people feel uncomfortable with holding the religious belief.
Yeah, there is well, in the case of Francis Collins, he is also a very committed Darwinian evolutionist. So he gets fire from both sides, I guess, on this.
Yeah,
and a bit of a
this is the interesting thing, and I think this has to be acknowledged when we're dealing with New Atheists. They are not for accommodation.
Yes.
They will pillory accommodationists. So they don't like anybody who is an atheist who says, well, you can be a Darwinian and a Christian. And they will rigorously attack a group like Biologos. They're not interested in peace,
group,
if you like, in that sense. They just do not see any compatibility between science and Christian belief.
Well, this is very interesting. It really takes us in a different direction, and so I don't want to go very far from your book. But Collins and Biologos' whole project is trying to make Christianity more appealing to the naturalist crowd by buying into their main baby, which is Darwinian evolution. And what you're suggesting is that crowd has no interest in people who are trying to baptize evolution with Christianity.
Absolutely not. I mean, when Biologos started, P.Z. Myers and Jerry Coyne, and they hammered them. And not only will they hammer Biologos, they'll hammer Michael Ruse, who's an atheist, but doesn't see an incompatibility between evolution and Christianity. I mean, there's no interest here at all in accommodation of any type.
Well, by the way, you are remarkably well-read and broadly educated on these issues. For a high school teacher, you must have very, very lucky students.
I don't know that they would describe it that way.
Okay. Well, so sneer pressure, this kind of ridicule, insult thing that, this is an elitism. We're smarter than the rest of you people. This, I have seen time and time again, substitute in the discussion coming from the new atheists to anyone who's any kind of theist. This is substituted for reasonable discourse. And they think that, it seems to me, all they have to do is make fun of religion, and they've done their job.
Yes, they believe that a soundbite sells the argument. So, I mean, an atheist is somebody who believes in one less God than you. So if you tell me why you don't believe in Zeus, I'll tell you why I don't believe in God. And they'll throw a soundbite like that out.
I know.
I mean, that's absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody who knows anything about ancient polytheism will know that you do not get one iota of insight into knowing why I believe in God,
right, by
knowing why I reject a belief in polytheism.
Yeah.
It's absolute nonsense.
Yeah, that is.
And quite often these soundbites do just demonstrate their ignorance.
Well, my rejoinder to that they believe in one less God than you do. I have two than we do. My two rejoinders is, yes, that's what makes me a theist and you an atheist. So all you've done is stated the obvious. And secondly, it's almost as profound as saying a bachelor has one less wife than a married man.
That's right. Yes.
That's
really what we're.
All
that's
the
really how you
difference in the
respond to this at all. I mean, and like you said, it's simply stating the obvious. It doesn't really bring us any further forward at all. So no, I mean, the slogans here aren't great, and the understanding of Christianity isn't great. A lot of people in these new atheist communities have maybe left the church in their teens or early 20s, and they tend to have a teenager's understanding of the Christian faith. And
unfortunately, that's not very good.
And they, because they believe they've been on the inside and they understand Christianity because they were in it as teenagers. Yeah. They think they know the faith.
Right.
And quite often they really don't. Their understanding is very poor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, teenagers' understanding is poor. It could be much better, if they're Christians.
Yes,
and this
the
is
church
something
would get into the teaching properly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about a very popular sneer. Then it's called. It is the appeal to the notion of the flying spaghetti monster. Tell us where that came from and how it plays out in our discussions here.
Well, the flying spaghetti monster, Bobby Henderson, has become famous for writing a letter to a school board which wanted to promote intelligent design, and this is meant to be a satire on theism. Mm-hmm. And he said, that he believed in a flying spaghetti monster had created the world, and he drew a little picture of it in ballpoint pen and said, I want equal time on the science curriculum. Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, even when intelligent design theorists argue that intelligent design will only tell you that there is design and will tell you nothing about the designer. Mm-hmm. This doesn't even work as a critique of intelligent design. Right. But what seems to be going on here is the idea is that Christians come along to anything that seems inexplicable, they just say God did it. Mm-hmm. That's really what they're saying. So if you're going to believe in God for that reason, you might as well believe in a flying spaghetti monster. Mm-hmm. And also, it seems to be that faith is completely blind if you're a Christian. Therefore, you can believe in any old nonsense. Mm-hmm. If you believe in a virgin birth, I'll believe in a flying spaghetti monster. Yeah, each is as valid as the other. Right. And part of the problem here is they really haven't got to grips with God, with what God means. A big theme in my book is that God is a holy God, is a God of limitless loving power. Mm-hmm. We're talking about giving a very simple explanation of one being, and because God is limitless loving power, which would entail choice, which entails knowledge, limitless knowledge, you're talking about a deep purpose behind the universe. Mm-hmm. Someone with purposes who can bring those purposes about, and someone who will value things. And this helps us explain morality. This helps us explain the order of the universe. Right. This explains so many things. And really, this flying spaghetti monster meme really has not got to grips with what Christians have been saying for 2,000 years.
Yeah, I like the way you put that, and that if they're trying to draw a parallel, it turns out they've missed the boat entirely, because Christianity is so rich in simply, in its explanatory power. If you just want to look at that, the explanatory power it has about real features of the world, morality, design, the existence of the world itself, all of these things, and none of that isn't captured or even acknowledged in the flying spaghetti monster parody.
Yes, well, this is one of the things I want to say is that if you want to look at the flying spaghetti monster parody, there's no explanatory power here at all. Uh-huh. I mean, there's no reason to know what a ridiculous creature like that would or might want to create. But also, if you're talking about omnipresent, omnipotent pasta, we're not really talking about pasta anymore. So, it's just very difficult to know what, pasta doesn't tend to have those properties. We do know quite a bit about pasta, and it doesn't do that sort of thing.
Nothing like that.
But what we don't have a lot of scientific knowledge about, or what we can't have scientific knowledge of, is there anything beyond the physical world? Right. We can't say anything about, the probabilities there, because science can't get outside to look at it. Mm-hmm. What we can do is we can consider, well, what's possible, what's conceivable, and does that explain anything about the physical world? Mm-hmm. And when you look at theism, these are very simple ideas, power to bring something about. We all experience that ourselves. Mm-hmm. Purposes, we all have purposes, we have choices. So can we conceive of someone with limitless power? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a very clear idea. And does that explain a vast amount of our world? Mm-hmm. Well, yes, it does. Yeah. It explains the laws of nature and explains why we have living creatures here on Earth, which is very improbable that of all the ways the universe could be, we have this massively beautiful, structured universe.
Right.
And in one tiny corner of it, we have these intricately structured, complex creatures who have this instinct to respond to a creator. That's part of the book as well.
Yeah, it reminds me of C.S. Lewis's remark that I believe in the sun not only because I can see it, because by it I can see everything else.
That's exactly right. Now, this is really where we need to. This is where if the church teaches God properly, and really gets people to move beyond simple emotional connections. Now, emotions are obviously very important, and I have no problem with upbeat, up-tempo music or anything like that at all. I have no difficulties at all with any of those things. But if we only focus on emotional connection and we don't explain why we should have that emotional connection with God, why is it that you would want to worship God? What is it about God that's so great?
Worthy of worship.
We lose our ability to worship Him properly. And we also lose the ability to witness to Him effectively to those who don't believe in Him.
Well, this kind of borders our conversation right now on the whole issue of when we were talking about science and science trying, from the perspective of the new atheists, adequately and little by little, and now more and more, in their view, explaining God away. The need for God is waning because science is answering the questions that God used to answer. But your point here is that it really goes much deeper than that. It's not just things that need answering, but it's a system by which you can get answers that needs an answer for.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that, on Saturday past, I was on the Unbelievable show talking with the producer and director of the film The Unbelievers. And one of the points I wanted to make to him was that science, this idea that science explains God away every time it finds a law or mechanism, it's nonsensical. The very first scientists, the very first people we can give that name to, so you're talking about Kepler or Galileo or men like that, they were predominantly men. They believed that we should search for laws and mechanisms in nature because there is a God of unlimited power who was free to create the world in any way he wanted. So you're not going to use Aristotle's natures or anything like that to explain the world. Because that limits God's freedom. What you want to do is to look at this world of very simple parts. Because it's simple parts, that gives God more freedom. But God will organize that world according to the laws of mathematics, the rules of mathematics, and that we'll be able to understand those mathematical rules because we're made in God's image. So they were basically saying, if there's a God, this is the way the world will be. And they went out and discovered laws and mechanisms, which is what they predicted from their Christian faith, from their Christian belief. These were men who happened to be Christian. These were men who were pursuing science because of their Christian belief. Their Christian belief played a large part in what they did. And this is just completely ignored whenever Dawkins or anybody suggests that Christians are just playing the God did it card. Whenever you find somebody say God did it. But look, the reason that you're looking for laws and mechanisms as a scientist is because way back at the beginning of the scientific revolution, Christians thought, well, if there's a creator, these are the sorts of things that we'll expect to find.
The world is going to be an organized place that we can pursue and understand and use for our benefit if God put us in here to be fruitful, multiply,
Exactly
and
right,
subdue.
Yes, that's another aspect to it. Exactly right. The very fact that we should expect usefulness out of nature. That's right.
So apart from being a science stopper, historically, Christian conviction, Christian worldview was the science starter.
Yeah, it was a large part. Now, there were other things going on. Mathematics was becoming more important in exploration and in bureaucracy, and there was the telescopes were being invented. There were different things going on, but what we needed was something that could bring all that together and say, these mathematicians who are sort of considered lower class people, who really aren't as serious as the philosophers, why should we start listening to those guys and believing that they can explain the world around us? And here was this very powerful idea that said we should listen to them. great architect of the universe.
Right.
So I don't want to say Christianity is the whole story, but take Christianity out.
Mm-hmm.
Very difficult to see how this whole thing gets started.
That's right. That's a great observation. I'm speaking with Graham Veale. His book, New Atheism, A Survival Guide, is an excellent guide for you to understanding the flaws of new atheistic thinking and how you can graciously respond. I was joking about you being the ironic Irishman, but it really does come across in your book a very winsome, attractive, almost playful interaction with some of these ideas. It makes your whole approach much more persuasive, I think, Graham.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Let's go to break, and we'll come back and talk more about where's the evidence. How about that? When we return with Graham Veale and New Atheism, A Survival Guide. You're listening to Stand to Reason.
Each of us as Christian ambassadors faces two daunting challenges when trying to make a difference for Christ. First, how do we initiate conversations about spiritual things in a way that doesn't seem awkward? Second, how do we keep ourselves from getting trapped or overwhelmed by others more aggressive than we are? Well, that's what Greg Koukl can teach you in his book and DVD curriculum on tactics. Greg will teach you how to maneuver in conversations so you can create more productive dialogue with skeptics and challengers. Tactics are practical skills that Greg gives names like Columbo, Suicide, Steamroller, Rhodes Scholar, and more. Tactics are a way of engaging others effectively and winsomely, no matter what the subject. If you're tired of finding yourself flat-footed and intimidated in conversations about what you believe, if you want to increase your confidence and your skill in discussions, no matter who you're talking to, then Tactics is for you. Order Tactics in book, DVD, CD, or MP3 format at STR's online store at str.org, or simply give us a call at 800-2-REASON. That's Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions.
Back at you here on Stand to Reason. Greg Koukl, one of the good guys, teaching you how to think every week here on Stand to Reason. 3 hours of thoughtful interaction with callers and authors. And actually, I don't want to just teach you what to think, but how to go about the process. And one good way of doing it, I think clear thinking is something that is caught as much as it is taught. One of the best ways to catch it is to kind of traffic with people who are doing it well, and one of them is Graham Veale in his book. That would be Veale, by the way, if you're trying to Google this. The website is, let's see if I get this right, Graham, saintsandskeptics.org.
That's right, yes.
That's right, yeah. And you can get more information about Graham there. The book, of course, New Atheism, A Survival Guide. And let's see, the publisher is, I'm looking for that.
It's Christian Focus.
Okay. Oh, that's right. Christian Focus. Thanks. Okay, now you have in your treatment here of the New Atheism, you cite New Atheist blogger Greta Christina a few times, and in the chapter, "Hey, where's the evidence?" which is a challenge that is frequently laid down to Christians from New Atheists, which I, by the way, recommend Christians next ask what counts as evidence from your perspective before they try to, chase that one off, because a lot of times you do your best, you give all kinds of good stuff, and then they say, well, that's not evidence. But Greta Christina talks about reasonable plausibility. Talk about the gauntlet that she throws down and how Christians or Christianity meets the challenge.
Well, really what she did is she wrote a blog piece. She tends to write very short blog pieces, Greta Christina, and basically she wants to know. In one case, she said that you can't prove that God doesn't exist, but she really wasn't saying that she doesn't want 100% proof. She just wants reasonable plausibility. In other words, what she wants is something like the best explanation.
Yeah.
And in her view, atheism is the best explanation of the universe. Now, if that's the game we're playing, I'm more than happy to play that game. I'm glad that she made that qualification for me, because quite often when people on the street, when you're talking about proof, they want something that's indubitable. They want something they can't doubt.
Right.
And really, when it comes to the day-to-day living, when it comes to just practically any academic subject, you don't get that.
No, that's right.
Maybe the best explanation is it's not a plesiosaur. that got me. I wondered that a Scottish publisher would publish that, but they did. So Greta Christina asked this question to Christians, hey, where's the evidence? And she also seems to think that Darwinism somehow explains design away. Now, I have to say I find this very odd, because reading, for example, Richard Dawkins, and just taking Darwinian evolution as said, let's grant that without any dispute. If you read Richard Dawkins, he actually makes it very clear within the God delusion that if you were to run the history of Earth, 1 billion times, you're not, or very, 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 very unlikely to get anything like humans again. You're very unlikely to get life at all. You're very unlikely to get complex life. And it strikes me that evolution isn't really doing an awful lot of explanatory work here at all. Dawkins has to say, well, there must be billions and billions and billions of planets out there, but he says this without a scratch of evidence.
That's right. He also does appeal to luck frequently. We just got really lucky.
He basically says, well, there must be billions of planets out there, Earth-like planets. Now, if you look at what would have happened to our planet if we didn't have something as simple as a moon, getting Earth-like planets might not be as simple as Dawkins assumes.
Right.
And secondly, he's also, and to me this is incredible, on his theory where you've got evolution plus luck plus lots of opportunities, he's basically telling me what I would find if I went out and looked at these planets. Because you need lots and lots of luck. The vast majority won't have life.
Right.
But if we found lots and lots of planets out there and they had all sorts of animal life on them, which wouldn't upset any Christian, that would completely falsify his theory. The bottom line is here, whenever you look at life on Earth, we have an incredibly improbable state of affairs. We shouldn't expect to find this, yet here we are. We shouldn't expect to find ourselves here. Here we are. We see wonderfully diverse, this diversity in life, this complexity in life. And it just strikes me that this lazy appeal to Darwinism isn't getting these guys anywhere.
It's a good contrast though to the challenge that Greta Christina has offered. Where's the evidence? And we say, well, here's really good evidence, the order designed, etc., and the difficulty of getting life by accident. This all suggests, actually, more than suggests, it almost demands an intelligent designer. And then you get this very, very weak rejoinder from people like Dawkins. Well, you're right, it's really a long shot, but if you've got billions of planets for which there's no evidence for, and you got a lot of luck, you're going to get it, so I win.
Yes, well, this is the thing. So I win. Well, I'm sorry. This is actually an underlying theme that if we can come up with any sort of naturalistic explanation, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Which means that they're moving from, well, there's a possibility you might be wrong to you're wrong.
Yeah.
And that's not good enough. You've got to show me that your explanation is simpler and more powerful and more comprehensive.
And has more explanatory
power. The bottom line for atheists is that why should we live in this ordered universe at all? There are many, 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 the way Dawkins puts it is there's many more ways to be dead than there are to be alive. The simplest way of putting that, it's a simple way of saying that there's many more ways to be disordered than there are to be ordered.
Right. And
if the universe is just an accident, none of this should be here. Nothing should be here. Or if observers assemble at random, they shouldn't find themselves surrounded by a vast, ordered, intricate universe. They should just find themselves surrounded by chaos.
Right.
But we don't.
And death.
So the whole universe seems to be crying out for a purposeful explanation. And the other thing we need to explain is value, and a very specific set of values. Why is it that an individual human being is of such immense value? So, I mean, I reference the story of Alois Nebel, who was an SS soldier who shot Jewish children in the back of the neck. He learned to soothe them and calm them in the middle of mass shootings and then would shoot them in the back of the neck. Now, that's shocking and horrific and morally so. And the question is why? What is it about an innocent human life that makes it of so much value? On naturalism, We're here by accident, and we're going to oblivion along with everything else.
Yeah.
So where does this immense value come from? Mm-hmm. And I think naturalistic attempts to explain this are very, very weak.
This is what...
It comes down to social usefulness.
Right.
Or sometimes it's just so story when moral values exist just because there's no explanation offered at all there. So whenever you look at moral values and you look at the order of the universe, and another factor I look at is the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's resurrection. I think one of the reasons that atheists, online atheists, have gone down this line of trying to argue that Jesus never existed. The only place you really find this is online.
Right.
But this meme, I'm sure you've come across it, that there never was a person called Jesus.
Of course. Now, almost nobody of credibility even would countenance the idea, but I was challenged with this once when I lectured at Purdue University to a large crowd during the Q&A. Somebody laid this on me, one in the atheist crowd, and I didn't mean to be condescending or anything, but I looked at him and said, you've been spending too much time on the internet. And
that's it.
And everybody started laughing when I said that. I didn't mean to embarrass him, but it's just what you're saying.
It's an online conspiracy, and I personally believe that the reason for this, people who should know better are saying this, is that once you admit that there's historical information in the Gospels, that once you make that admission, you're going to have to admit that there is an empty tomb. The evidence there is very good,
right?
Excellent evidence, and there's nothing miraculous about that. You're going to have to admit that people seen Jesus after his execution. You're going to have to admit that they have this very strong belief in the resurrection. There's nothing miraculous about any of those beliefs.
Right.
But when you put them together and try to explain them all, the only real explanation that covers them all neatly and simply and powerfully is that God raised them from the dead.
Right.
So I think this is why we're facing this crazy online surge of ideas that there never was a Jesus Christ. Because once you start letting historical facts in through the door, you're going to have to take this argument for the resurrection very seriously.
Yeah, once you play the historical game, when you allow those facts to get on the table, it's not going to play well for the atheists, because the historical community understands the historical reliability and trustworthiness in general of the New Testament documents, even especially the Gospels. Though they reject the supernatural elements, they're going to affirm the salient details of the life of Jesus of Nazareth. But once that happens, it kind of, as you pointed out, Graham, it sets into motion a series of conclusions that it's going to be very, very difficult to be intellectually honest and reject the rationale for the empty tomb or the best one was what the disciples themselves claim: he who is dead is now risen.
Yeah, my friend David Glass, who's written Atheism's New Clothes with IVP over here, he's been doing some work on the probabilities here recently, and it is very interesting to see that really, if you're not going to believe that Jesus rose from the dead, you've got to really postulate a series of very low probability events, a lot of coincidences to create that evidence. So, I mean, to me, the case for the resurrection is very, very strong.
Graham, thank you so much for spending some of your day with us. I imagine it's pretty late at night there, or maybe middle of the morning. I think it's 8 or 9.
Just approaching 1 o'clock.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not too bad. Maybe those are your normal hours. But thank you so much for the hard work you put into New Atheism, a survival guide.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
And maybe someday I'll make it to Northern Ireland and we can have a cup of coffee or something appropriate.
That would be great.
All the best to you, Graham.
Okay, thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you. The book, once again, is New Atheism, a Survival Guide, and Graham Veale is the author. It's published by Christian Focus Publications that has also published another wonderful book that is a great companion to this called The Dawkins Letters. David Robertson is the author there. Both these books are very accessible. This one's only 125 pages long. I love finding smaller books like this that cover the bases well because I am motivated to read them. I pick them up and I say, I can do this fairly quickly. In fact, I covered most of the book on a flight to Oklahoma last week. So I commend it to you and encourage you to take a look at it. What it does is it takes a lot of the basic challenges, categories of challenges, whether it's science, whether it's the God of the Gaps, whether it's foolish parodies like the flying spaghetti monster, whether it's mischaracterizations of Scripture that he calls whales, tall tales, and miracles, and or whether denying that Jesus even existed. He takes these on in a careful, gracious, and attractive way. That's a lot of fun. Easy read. It's a great way to get a good foundation in the basics. We'll be coming back here in just a bit for our final hours here, and I'll be taking your calls at Stand to Reason. I'll look forward to talking to you then. I'm Greg Koukl for Stand to Reason. Stay with us.